My sister told my parents she was pregnant with my boyfriend's baby, and they demanded he marry her, but her lie collapsed in 3 minutes when he showed up with his mother. My sister Nadine told my parents she was pregnant with my boyfriend's baby on a Tuesday night during dinner. She didn't call ahead. She sat down at the table, waited until Dad finished saying grace, and said, "I need to tell you something. I'm pregnant, and the father is Joseph." Joseph had been my boyfriend for 3 years. We had been talking about moving in together. Nadine knew all of this because I told her everything. She was my sister and I trusted her. When Nadine said Joseph's name, my mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Dad put both hands flat on the table. Nobody looked at me. Not once. Mom turned to Nadine and said, "How far along are you?" Nadine said, "3 months." Mom said, "Have you been to a doctor?" Nadine said yes. Dad said, "Does Joseph know?" Nadine said he knows, and he's been ignoring it. That was a lie. Joseph had no idea Nadine was saying any of this because nothing had ever happened between them. They had met maybe 4 times total, always at family dinners, always with me sitting right next to Joseph. I said that's not true. Dad held up his hand and said, "Let your sister talk." Nadine started crying. She said Joseph came on to her at a barbecue last summer, and one thing led to another, and she didn't know how to tell me. There was no barbecue last summer. Joseph and I spent last summer visiting his mother in New Mexico. We were gone for 6 weeks, but my parents didn't know that because they never asked about my life. They only ever asked about Nadine. The next morning my father called Joseph. He didn't ask questions. He told Joseph he needed to come to the house on Saturday and do the right thing. Joseph called me confused and said, "Your dad just told me I need to marry your sister." I told him what Nadine said. Joseph went quiet for a long time and then said, "I'm coming Saturday, and I'm bringing my mother." Saturday came. My parents had the living room set up like a courtroom. Dad in his recliner, Mom on the couch next to Nadine, who was wearing a loose dress and had her hand on her stomach the whole time. She wasn't showing anything because there was nothing to show, but she kept rubbing her belly and talking about morning sickness. Joseph walked in with his mother Alma. Alma was a retired home health aide who spent 30 years taking care of pregnant women. She carried a large canvas bag that she set down by her feet. Dad started immediately. He said, "Joseph, we raised our daughters right, and when a man gets a woman pregnant, he steps up." Joseph said, "Sir, I have never been alone with Nadine. Not once. Not ever." Dad said, "Don't sit here and lie to my face." Nadine started crying again. Mom said, "Joseph, you should be ashamed of yourself. This girl is carrying your child, and you won't even acknowledge her." Joseph said, "I spent last summer in Las Cruces with my mother. We were there from June through July." Nadine said the barbecue was in August. Joseph said there was no barbecue in August either. "I was working double shifts at the warehouse the whole month. My supervisor can confirm every single day." Nadine wiped her eyes and said, "Well, maybe it wasn't a barbecue exactly." Dad said it doesn't matter when it happened. What matters is the baby. That is when Alma spoke up for the first time. She said, "Nadine, sweetheart, how far along did you say you were?" Nadine said 3 months. Alma said, "And who is your doctor?" Nadine said she didn't want to share that information. Alma nodded and said, "I understand, but since we're all here, why don't we just settle it right now?" She reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a sealed pregnancy test still in the box. She set it on the coffee table in front of everyone. She said, "This takes 3 minutes. If you're pregnant, we'll all know for sure and we can have a real conversation about what comes next." I watched my sister's face change. It went from teary and helpless to something stiff and guarded. Mom said she doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Alma said with all respect, "Ma'am, your daughter is asking my son to give up his life and marry her based on a claim of pregnancy. A 3-minute test seems fair before we start planning a wedding, don't you think?" Dad said this is ridiculous. Alma said what's ridiculous is asking a young man to marry a woman he has never touched based on nothing but her word. Nadine said I already took a test at home and it was positive. Alma said wonderful. Then this one will be positive too. 3 minutes. Nobody moved. Joseph sat with his arms crossed.